In this episode of Think Smart with Rob McClelland, we briefly discuss three quite different topics. First, I share an inspiring story of how one person can make a huge difference in the lives of others in retirement. It is a classic Phase 4 success story. In the second part, we discuss how my Squeezing the Juice podcast evolved. That's where we interview successful Phase 4 retirees who are squeezing all the juice out of retirement. Finally, we briefly discuss Rob's 10,000 Days initiative, one of the first of its kind by a financial advisor in Canada.
Hello, this is Rob and Mike from the McClelland Financial Group of Asante Capital Management, and this is Think Smart with TMFG. Mike, today on Think Smart with TMFG, we're going to be bringing back our special guest, Dr. Riley Moynes, author of The 4 Phases of Retirement and also of a book called The 10 Lessons, How You Too Can Squeeze All the Juice Out of Retirement. So the last time we had Riley in, we had talked a little bit about the books. Today I'd like to talk about something that Riley did after the books or in between, and that was this thing called iLife. So Riley, tell me what's iLife and what was your involvement?
What's it all about? Yes, iLife. Well, in the context of the 4 phases, I met a fellow who is a neighbor of ours in our Florida community, and he's a classic example of a Phase 4 person. His name is Bill. He spent 40 years as a dentist inflicting pain, although that really wasn't his major intent. It just happened that way. But when he retired, he had this idea that our community could be a better community. It could be different than it was. Our community is essentially a golf community, and Bill had this idea that you can only golf so much, and what happens when you get to the stage of your life when you perhaps can't golf anymore or don't want to golf as much as you did before. And he had this idea that in our community, and there are about 1,000 doors in our community, he had this concept that we talked about that he was convinced that in that community that there was a tremendous resource, a tremendous pool of expertise and experience. And he had this idea that if you ask people to volunteer and to share their expertise, they would do so. People don't ordinarily come and say, hey, I'm really good at this, I want to do that. No, but he understood that if you were to ask somebody, they would probably do it. So he was the lead on this, and it was his initiative, and I helped him as best I could. But our job then was to go around and to identify people who we knew were experts in different areas. And it was a wide range. There was one fella, a tremendous bridge player and a very knowledgeable bridge educator. And we approached him and said, Dean, would you provide learning opportunities for people who want to learn how to play bridge? And he said, of course I will. And the same thing was true with some ladies who were experts at Mahjong. And one lady was a particularly good watercolor artist. And we asked her, yes. And everybody said yes. And Bill himself was an early adopter of some of the Apple technology, the iPads and the iPods and the iPhones and all that kind of stuff. He was convinced that a number of the people in our community were being given iPhones and iPads by their children at Christmas, and they had no clue how to use the darn things, and they might be able to turn them on, but that was about it. And so we set up, in the first year, there were 9 of these learning opportunities. And every single person that we asked said yes, they would do so. And we had 400 or 500 people in the first year who signed up to take part in these things. We could not accommodate all the people who wanted to learn how to use their iPads, for example. We just couldn't accommodate them all at the same time. And so the next year, it kind of steamrollered, and the number of offerings went from 9, I think it was, to 45. And we kind of doubled the number of people who participated. People who are doing it on a volunteer basis, no charge to people in our community who want to participate. And the third year, it doubled again. And the fourth year, last year, it doubled again. So that last year, there were over 2,000 people in our community who participated in over 100 of these offerings. Amazing. And the impact on our community was outstanding because what it really did, it was an unintended consequence, was that people began to buy in our community because of this iLife offering. And it actually kind of increased property values. It was a value add that no one had ever anticipated. So it's a classic example of how one person with an idea can make a huge difference. And so Bill has spent the last 5 or 6 years developing this. And so here's the next phase of it, which is interesting. There are dozens of communities in Southwest Florida that are similar to ours. So now we have hired a person to coordinate all of this. There was an additional charge for each of the members for their annual bill. Virtually no complaints about it at all because almost everybody was participating in this thing. So now what Bill has done is he stepped away from our community, and so his mission is now to go to other communities who are like ours and say, here's what we've done. Would you be interested in doing the same kind of thing? And so there are now 9 communities in Southwest Florida in our area who are developing something similar. And last year, for the first time, we had people from our community visit another community to make their presentation, and vice versa. So we've now got a kind of a cross-pollination of stuff, people coming into our community. So it's a classic example, as I use in my workshops and as I use in the book, of a person who sees the opportunity, who found something that he loved to do, has made a huge difference in our community, and just has kind of revived him and made him feel that he's really making a significant contribution in his retirement.
If you build it, they will come.
Exactly. If you build something appealing, they will come, and that's what he did. It's a wonderful story. It's just a wonderful story.
So Riley, you've been building something in the podcast community now, haven't you?
I have, yes, similar to you guys. So the background to that one is that people began to ask me after the 4 phases had been in print for a couple of years. They say, well, what's next? And so I thought about that a little bit. I began to think that there was an opportunity to focus in on phase 4, people like Bill. And so I began to identify and to interview as many of those people as I could. And I asked them, what's the secret of a successful retirement? Dozens and dozens of people were kind enough to chat with me about it. And the result of that was a book called The 10 Lessons, How You Too Can Squeeze All the Juice Out of Retirement. I wanted the book to be the same format as the 4 phases. It's only about a 50-page book, and so it didn't really allow for a lot of in-depth conversation with those folks. So then I thought, well, a way to provide an opportunity to give them some more chance to tell their story would be to do a podcast. So we started the podcast, squeezingthejuice.ca. It's available on Spotify and on iTunes and Google Play and all those platforms. So far, we've done about 20 interviews, and these are all people who I consider to be phase 4 retirees, people who have reinvented and readapted themselves and are doing things that are really meaningful to them. Just to give you one example of one interviewee that I was referred to, this is a fellow named Robin McKee. He worked for years at CHTV in Hamilton. And Robin had cancer. He had eye cancer. And he had some surgeries, and as a result of those surgeries, he became blind. And yet he did not let that get in the way. He continues to this day to offer historical tours of the Hamilton Cemetery. He's got 14 different tour themes that he provides. He's legally blind, and he's still out there providing these free tours every single week in Hamilton. And when I interviewed him last November, he was all excited about the fact that he was just in the final stages of mounting a show of photographs that he had taken, all after he had lost his sight. And I heard from him last week, and he sent me an indication that he had talked about this at the time. It had been suggested to him that he should take some of his photographs and turn it into a book. And the book was published last week. Classic example, and that's the sort of person that I've been looking to interview on these podcasts. And you can hear Robin's podcast on these platforms as well. going to carry on. We've kind of put things on hiatus for a little bit. I prefer meeting with people kind of face to face, and during the pandemic, that's been more difficult to do. I found we did a couple of Zoom interviews. I just didn't find them quite as satisfying, and so we just kind of put a pause on it until we can meet face to face again in the not too distant future, I hope.
Interesting. So, Riley, more recently, Mike and I have been developing, at the early stages of developing a project we're calling the 10,000 Day Project. Mm-hmm. And why the number 10,000? Well, one, you've got 10,000 boomers retiring every day, and number two, that's roughly the number of days that our clients are spending in retirement. Mm-hmm. And so we, as advisors, have been exposed to a lot of the good and the bad of retirement. And what we realized is there weren't a lot of resources out there for retirees in Canada. And so what we wanted to do is to become that resource, not only for our clients, but for other Canadians. And I guess my question for you is, what do you like about the sounds of this project that we're starting on?
Well, when we chatted about it a couple of months ago, I was really excited about it, Rob. First of all, because I think that through your commitment to providing copies of the 4 phases of retirement to a number of your clients, I'm hopeful that people are going to have or be provided with a framework that can help them to understand the challenges and changes that they are going to experience, but that I had no idea about, that I struggled with. I had no idea what phase I was in because I didn't know what the phases were. And I'm just hopeful, and I certainly believe that providing that kind of framework is going to provide a real significant value-added service to those people. So that part of it excites me a whole lot.
I think it's interesting, especially while we're going through this pandemic, and some of the things that may have come to mind for the early retirees of, more time with family and friends, traveling the world, knocking off some of those big trips that they weren't able to do in their working life. Some of those have definitely been put on hold. And
for sure.
Even questions of whether they're going down to Florida or Arizona, those are tricky things. And I know a lot of our clients are saying they may not be going anywhere this year.
Me too.
Right? Like no one's sure yet. No. Do you want to head down to where there's 10 times more cases than we're experiencing here in Ontario?
Yeah.
Have you figured out, 10,000 days? Have you figured out what day you're on?
I haven't, no, but 10,000 days does resonate with my research about 1/3 of our lives in retirement, so there's certainly an overlap there. My mom, just last February, turned 100. She attributes it, she's Danish by descent, she attributes it to some degree to her Viking genes, and I can claim some of those Viking genes as well, I suppose. But when we went to see her, this was in February, just before things were all shut down, I visited her and I said, Mom, I don't know of anybody else who is 100 years old. And she said to me, well, this is what it looks like.
Oh, that's great.
So, where am I? I think I've got some time left. I think I'm in the early stages of phase 4.
Riley, thank you again for joining us. That brings us to the end of another week. This is Rob and Mike with Think Smart from the McClellan Financial Group of Asante Capital Management, reminding you to live the life that makes you happy.